Okay, welcome to Logan Reads Live this lovely Wednesday. And you may notice that the camera position is a little bit different. We're in a temporary situation here. Next week, we should be um, adjusted to a new filming situation. But we've got a different camera now. And for today and Friday, we're probably going to be using this setup. But it's obviously looks a little crowded on this side with the mic and the lamp and everything all clustered on top of each other. But this is temporary, so hopefully that doesn't bother you too much. Anyways, welcome to Logan Reads Live this lovely Wednesday. Logan Reads Live, of course, is presented by Rosalyn Jane, where you can find the Three Kids shirt. This classic Three Kids shirt is made from soft cotton and features a fun saying for any mom or dad of three kids. This short sleeve crew neck design is comfortable to wear and is sure to bring a smile to all who see it. And you can see it by following the link in the description down below to find that fun kid saying. You can also go to rosalynandjane.com to find the whole beautifully curated collection of women's clothes. All right, so today we are going to return to Edgar Rice Burroughs' The Pirates of Venus. But first, we're going to read The Tyger by William Blake. Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? Or what the hand dare seize the fire? And what shoulder and what art? Sorry about that. I'm just going to restart. I suddenly had a sound there. Okay. The Tyger by William Blake. Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? What the hammer, what the chain? In what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what dread grasp dare its deadly terrors clasp? When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? Although I do think you're supposed to sort of make eye and symmetry rhyme, which I obviously did not do. All right. It's time now for the feature presentation of Logan Reads Live, Chapter 2 of The Pirates of Venus by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Off for Mars. As I set my ship down in the sheltered cove along the shore of desolate Guadalupe, a trifle over 4 hours after I left Tarzana, the little Mexican steamer I had chartered to transport my men, materials, and supplies from the mainland, rode peacefully at anchor in the tiny harbor, while on the shore, waiting to welcome me, were grouped the laborers, mechanics, and assistants who had worked with such wholehearted loyalty for long months in preparation for this day. Towering head and shoulders above the others loomed Jimmy Welsh, the only American among them. I taxied in close to shore and moored the ship to a buoy, while the men launched a dory and rowed out to get me. I had been absent less than a week, most of which had been spent in Guyamas, awaiting the expected letter from Tarzana. But so exuberantly did they greet me, one might have thought me a long lost brother returned from the dead. So dreary and desolate and isolated is Guadalupe to those who must remain upon her lonely shores for even a brief interval between contacts with the mainland. Perhaps the warmth of their greeting may have been enhanced by a desire to conceal their true feelings. We had been together constantly for months. Warm friendships had sprung up between us, and tonight we were to separate with little likelihood that they and I should ever meet again. This was to be my last day on earth. After today, I should be as dead to them as though 3 feet of earth covered my inanimate corpse. It is possible that my own sentiments colored my interpretation of theirs, for I am frank to confess that I have been apprehending this last moment as the most difficult of the whole adventure. I have come in contact with the peoples of many countries, but I recall none with more lovable qualities than Mexicans who have not been contaminated by too close contact with the intolerance and commercialism of Americans. And then there was Jimmy Welsh. It was going to be like parting with a brother when I said goodbye to him. For months he had been begging to go with me, and I knew that he would continue to beg up to the last minute, but I could not risk a single life unnecessarily. We all piled into the trucks that we had used to transport supplies and materials from the shore to the camp, which lay inland a few miles, and bumped over our makeshift road to the little tableland where the giant torpedo lay upon its mile-long track. "Everything is ready," said Jimmy. "We polished off the last details this morning. Every roller on the track has been inspected by at least a dozen men. We towed the old crate and back and forth over the full length of the track 3 times with a truck, and then repacked all the rollers with grease. 3 of us have checked over every item of equipment and supplies individually. We've done about everything but fire the rockets, and now we're ready to go. You are going to take me along, aren't you, Carr?" I shook my head. "Please don't, Jimmy," I begged. "I have a perfect right to gamble my own life, but not with yours, so forget it. But I am going to do something for you," I added, "just as a token of my appreciation of the help you've given me and all that sort of rot. I'm going to give you my ship to remember me by." He was grateful, of course, but still he could not hide his disappointment in not being allowed to accompany me, which was evidenced by an invidious comparison he drew between the ceiling of the Sikorsky and that of the old crate, as he had affectionately dubbed the great torpedo like rocket that was to bear me out into space in a few hours. "A 35 million-mile ceiling," he mourned dolefully. "Think of it, Mars for a ceiling." "And I may hit the ceiling!" I exclaimed fervently. The laying of the track upon which the torpedo was to take off had been the subject of a year of calculation and consolation. The day of departure had been planned far ahead, and the exact point at which Mars would rise above the eastern horizon on that night calculated, as well as the time. Then it was necessary to make allowances for the rotation of the earth and the attraction of the nearer heavenly bodies. The track was then laid in accordance with these calculations. It was constructed with a very slight drop in the first 3/4 of a mile, and then rose gradually at an angle of 2½ degrees from horizontal. A speed of 4½ miles per second at the takeoff would be sufficient to neutralize gravity. To overcome it, I must attain a speed of 6.93 miles per second. To allow a sufficient factor of safety, I had powered the torpedo to attain a speed of 7 miles per second at the end of the runway, which I purposed stepping up to 10 miles per second while passing through the Earth's atmosphere. What my speed would be through space was problematical, but I based all my calculations on the theory that it would not deviate much from the speed at which I left the Earth's atmosphere until I came within the influence of the gravitational pull of Mars. The exact instant at which to make the start had also caused me considerable anxiety. I had calculated it again and again, but there were so many factors to be taken into consideration that I had found it expedient to have my figures checked and rechecked by a well known physicist and an equally prominent astronomer. Their deductions tallied perfectly with mine. The torpedo must start upon its journey toward Mars sometime before the red planet rose above the eastern horizon. The trajectory would be along a constantly flattening arc, influenced considerably at first by the Earth's gravitational pull, which would decrease inversely as the square of the distance attained. As the torpedo left the Earth's surface on a curved tangent, its departure must also be so nicely timed that when it eventually escaped the pull of the Earth, its nose would be directed toward Mars. On paper, these figures appeared most convincing, but as the moment approached for my departure, I must confess to a sudden realization that they were based wholly upon theory, and I was struck with the utter folly of my mad venture. For a moment, I was aghast. The enormous torpedo with its 60 tons lying there at the end of its mile-long track loomed above me, the semblance of a gargantuan coffin, my coffin, in which I was presently to be dashed to earth, or to the bottom of the Pacific, or cast out into space to wander there to the end of time. I was afraid. I admit it. But it was not so much the fear of death as the effect of the sudden realization of the stupendousness of the cosmic forces against which I had pitted my puny powers that temporarily unnerved me. Then Jimmy spoke to me. "Let's have a last look at things inside the old crate before you shove off," he suggested, and my nervousness and my apprehensions vanished beneath the spell of his quiet tones and his matter of fact manner. I was myself again. Together we inspected the cabin where are located the controls, a wide and comfortable berth, a table, a chair, writing materials, and a well stocked bookshelf. Behind the cabin is a small galley, and just behind the galley a storeroom containing canned and dehydrated foods of sufficient to last me a year. Back of this is a small battery room containing storage batteries for lighting, heating, and cooking, a dynamo, and a gas engine. The extreme stern compartment is filled with rockets and the intricate mechanical device by which they are fed to the firing chambers by means of the controls in the cabin. Forward of the main cabin is a large compartment in which are located the water and oxygen tanks, as well as a quantity of odds and ends necessary either to my safety or comfort. Everything, it is needless to say, is fastened securely against the sudden and terrific stress that must accompany the takeoff. Once out in space, I anticipate no sense of motion, but the start is going to be rather jarring. To absorb as much as possible the shock of the takeoff, the rocket consists of two torpedoes, a smaller torpedo within a larger one, the former considerably shorter than the latter and consisting of several sections, each one comprising one of the compartments I have described. Between the inner and outer shells and between each two compartments is installed a system of ingenious hydraulic shock absorbers designed to more or less gradually overcome the inertia of the inner torpedo during the takeoff. I trust that it functions properly. In addition to these precautions against disaster at the start, the chair in which I shall sit before the controls is not only heavily overstuffed, but is secured to a track or framework that is equipped with shock absorbers. Furthermore, there are means whereby I may strap myself securely into the chair before taking off. I have neglected nothing essential to my safety, upon which depends the success of my project. Following our final inspection of the interior, Jimmy and I clambered to the top of the torpedo for a last inspection of the parachutes, which I hope will sufficiently retard the speed of the rocket after it enters the atmosphere of Mars to permit me to bail out with my own parachute in time to make a safe landing. The main parachutes are in a series of compartments running the full length of the top of the torpedo. To explain them more clearly, I may say that they are a continuous series of batteries and parachutes, each battery consisting of a number of parachutes of increasing diameter from the uppermost, which is the smallest. Each battery is in an individual compartment, and each compartment is covered at the will of the operator by controls in the cabin. Each parachute is anchored to the torpedo by a separate cable. I expect about one half of them to be torn loose while checking the speed of the torpedo sufficiently to permit the others to hold and further retard it to the point where I may safely open the doors and jump with my own parachute and oxygen tank. The moment for departure was approaching. Jimmy and I had descended to the ground, and the most difficult ordeal now faced me, that of saying goodbye to these loyal friends and coworkers. We did not say much. We were too filled with emotion, and there was not a dry eye among us. Without exception, none of the Mexican laborers could understand why the nose of the torpedo was not pointed straight up in the air if my intended destination were Marte. Nothing could convince them that I would not shoot out a short distance and make a graceful nose dive into the Pacific. That is, if I started at all, which many of them doubted. There was a hand clasp all around, and then I mounted the ladder leaning against the side of the torpedo and entered it. As I closed the door of the outer shell, I saw my friends piling into the trucks and pulling away, for I had given orders that no one should be within a mile of the rocket when I took off, fearing as I did the effect upon them of the terrific explosions that must accompany the takeoff. Securing the outer door with its great vault like bolts, I closed the inner door and fastened it. Then I took my seat before the controls and buckled the straps that held me to the chair. I glanced at my watch. It lacked 9 minutes of the 0 hour. In 9 minutes, I should be on my way out into the great void, or in 9 minutes, I should be dead. If all did not go well, the disaster would follow within a fraction of a split second after I touched the first firing control. 7 minutes. My throat felt dry and parched. I wanted a drink of water, but there was no time. 4 minutes. 35 million miles are a lot of miles. Yet I planned on spanning them between 40 and 45 days. 2 minutes. I inspected the oxygen gauge and opened the valve a trifle wider. 1 minute. I thought of my mother and wondered if she were way out there somewhere waiting for me. 30 seconds. My hand was on the control. 15 seconds. 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I turned the pointer. There was a muffled roar. The torpedo leapt forward. I was off. I knew that the takeoff was a success. I glanced through the port at my side at the instant that the torpedo started. But so terrific was its initial speed that I saw only a confused blur as the landscape rushed past. I was thrilled and delighted by the ease and perfection with which the takeoff had been accomplished, and I must admit that I was not a little surprised by the almost negligible effects that were noticeable in the cabin. I had had the sensation as of a giant hand pressing me suddenly back against the upholstery of my chair, but that had passed almost at once, and now there was no sensation different from that which one might experience sitting in an easy chair in a comfortable drawing room on terra firma. There was no sensation of motion after the first few seconds that were required to pass through the Earth's atmosphere. And now that I had done all that lay within my power to do, I could only leave the rest to momentum, gravitation, and fate. Releasing the straps that held me to the chair, I moved about the cabin to look through the various ports, of which there were several in the sides, keel, and top of the torpedo. Space was a black void dotted with countless points of light. The Earth I could not see, for it lay directly astern. Far ahead was Mars. All seemed well. I switched on the electric lights and, seating myself at the table, made the first entries in the log. Then I checked over various computations of time and distances. My calculations suggested that in about 3 hours from the takeoff, the torpedo would be moving almost directly toward Mars. And from time to time, I took observations through the wide angle telescopic periscope that is mounted flush with the upper surface of the torpedo's shell, but the results were not entirely reassuring. In 2 hours, Mars was dead ahead. The arc of the trajectory was not flattening as it should. It became apprehensive. Was wrong? Where had our careful computations erred? I left the periscope and gazed down through the main keel port. Below and ahead was the moon, a gorgeous spectacle as viewed through the clear void of space from a distance some 72,000 miles less than I had ever seen it before, and with no earthly atmosphere to reduce visibility. Tycho, Plato, and Copernicus stood out in bold relief upon the brazen disk of the great satellite, deepening by contrast the shadows of Mare Serenitatis and Mare Tranquillitas. The rugged peaks of the Apennine and the Altai, the Altai lay revealed as distinctly as I had ever seen them through the largest telescope. I was thrilled, but I was distinctly worried too. 3 hours later, I was less than 59,000 miles from the moon, where its aspect had been gorgeous before. Now it beggared description, but my apprehension had caused an increase in proportion. I might say, as the square of its increasing gorgeousness. Through the periscope, I had watched the arc of my trajectory pass through the plane of Mars and drop below it. I knew quite definitely then that I could never reach my goal. I tried not to think of the fate that lay ahead of me, but instead sought to discover the error that had wrought this disaster. For an hour I checked over various calculations, but could discover nothing that might shed light on the cause of my predicament. Then I switched off the lights and looked down through the keel port to have a closer view of the moon. It was not there. Stepping to the port side of the cabin, I looked through one of the heavy circular glasses out into the void of space. For an instant I was horror stricken. Apparently, just off the port bow loomed an enormous world. It was the moon, less than 23,000 miles away, and it was hurtling toward me at a rate of 36,000 miles an hour. I leapt to the periscope, and in the next few seconds, I accomplished some lightning mental calculating that more constitute an all time record. I watched the deflection of our course in the direction of the moon. Following it across the lens of the periscope, I computed the distance to the moon and the speed of the torpedo, and I came to the conclusion that I had better than a fighting chance of missing the great orb. I had little fear of anything but a direct hit, since our speed was so great that the attraction of the moon could not hold us if we missed her, even by a matter of feet. But it was quite evident that it had affected our flight, and with this realization came the answer to the question that had been puzzling me. To my mind flashed the printer's story of the first perfect book. It had been said that no book had ever before been published containing not a single error. A great publishing house undertook to publish such a book. The galley proofs were read and reread by a dozen different experts. The page proofs received the same careful scrutiny. At last, the masterpiece was ready for the press, errorless. It was printed and bound and sent out to the public. And then it was discovered that the title had been misspelled on the title page. With all our careful calculation, with all our checking and rechecking, we had overlooked the obvious. We had not taken the moon into consideration at all. Explain it if you can. I cannot. It was just one of those things, as people say when a good team loses or a poor one. It was a break, and a bad one. How bad it was, I did not even try to conjecture at the time. I just sat at the periscope, watching the moon racing toward us. As we neared it, it presented the most gorgeous spectacle that I have ever witnessed. Each mountain peak and crater stood out in vivid detail. Even the great height of the summits over 25,000 feet appeared distinguishable to me, though imagination must have played a major part in the illusion, since I was looking down upon them from above. Suddenly, I realized that the great sphere was passing rapidly from the field of the periscope, and I breathed a sigh of relief. We were not going to score a clean hit. We were going to pass by. I returned then to the porthole. The moon lay just ahead and a little to the left. It was no longer a great sphere. It was a world that filled my whole range of vision. Against its black horizon, I saw titanic peaks. Below me, huge craters yawned. I stood with God on high and looked down upon a dead world. Our transit of the moon required a little less than 4 minutes. I timed it carefully that I might check our speed. How close we came, I may only guess. Perhaps 5,000 feet above the tallest peaks. But it was close enough. The pull of the moon's gravitation had definitely altered our course. But owing to our speed, we had eluded her clutches. Now we were racing away from her. But to what? The nearest star, Alpha Centauri, is 25.5 million miles from Earth. But why trifle with short distances like this? There was little likelihood that I should visit Alpha Centauri, with all the wide range of space at my command and many more interesting places to go. I knew that I had ample room in which to wander, since science has calculated the diameter of space to be 84,000 million light years, which, when one reflects that light travels at the rate of 186,000 miles a second, should satisfy the wanderlust of the most inveterate roamer. However, I was not greatly concerned with any of these distances, as I had food and water for only a year, during which time the torpedo might travel slightly more than 315 million miles. Even if it had reached our near neighbor, Alpha Centauri, I should not then be greatly interested in the event, as I should have been dead for over 80,000 years. Such is the immensity of the universe. During the next 24 hours, the course of the torpedo nearly paralleled the moon's orbit around the Earth. Not only had the pull of the moon deflected its course, but now it seemed evident that the Earth had seized us and that we were doomed to race through eternity around her, a tiny second satellite. But I did not wish to be a moon. Certainly not an insignificant moon that in all probability might not be picked up even by the largest telescope. The next month was the most trying of my life. It seems the height of egotism even to mention my life in the face of the stupendous cosmic forces that engulfed it. But it was the only life I had, and I was fond of it. And the more imminent seemed the moment when it should be snuffed out, the better I liked it. At the end of the second day, it was quite apparent that we had eluded the grip of the earth. I cannot say that I was elated at the discovery. My plan to visit Mars was ruined. I should have been glad to return to Earth. If I could have landed safely on Mars, I certainly could have landed safely on Earth. But there was another reason why I should have been glad to have returned to Earth, a reason that loomed large and terrible ahead. The sun. We were heading straight for the sun now. Once in the grip of that mighty power, nothing could affect our destiny. We were doomed. For 3 months I must await the inevitable end before plunging into that fiery furnace. Furnace is an inadequate word by which to suggest the sun's heat, which is reputedly from 30 to 60 million degrees at the center, a fact which should not have concerned me greatly, since I did not anticipate reaching the center. The days dragged on, or I should say the long night. There were no days, other than the record that I kept of the passing hours. I read a great deal. I made no entries in the log. Why write something that was presently to be plunged into the sun and consumed? I experimented in the galley, attempting fancy cooking. I ate a great deal. It helped to pass the time away. I enjoyed my meals. On the 30th day, I was scanning space ahead when I saw a gorgeous, shimmering crescent far to the right of our course. But I must confess that I was not greatly interested in sights of any sort. In 60 days I should be in the sun. Long before that, however, the increasing heat would have destroyed me. The end was approaching rapidly. You know, this is one of those books, sort of like Jules Verne's, where he's writing about things that he really doesn't know anything about. Edgar Rice Burroughs died in 1950, which, of course, is before there were satellites in space, other than the moon, of course. It's funny when he was describing the fact that he was using his rocket off a ramp and a slight slope, I was like, I wonder how many people thought that was a good way to launch a rocket. Whereas we know that that's not a good way to launch a rocket. And I don't know all the physics behind it, but one clear thing is that you end up having to go through way more atmosphere if you're going at an angle through it rather than just straight shortest distance to escape the atmosphere. So those Mexicans that said, "Hey, you should probably just shoot this straight up," they're probably right. Anyways, thank you so much for coming and listening to Logan Reads Live, which of course is presented by Rosalyn Jane, which we are featuring the Three Kids shirt. This classic Three Kids shirt is made from soft cotton and features a fun saying for any mom or dad of three kids. The short sleeve crew neck design is comfortable to wear and is sure to bring a smile to all who see it. And you can see it by following the link in the description down below. There is, of course, also a link to go directly to rosalynandjane.com where you can find the whole beautifully curated collection of women's clothes. Thank you so much for coming and listening to Logan Reads Live. I hope you have a wonderful night, and bye for now.